Well, I don't recall inviting John over for dinner, but John, you are always welcome. Just saying. Anyway, moving on. It's been called the worst refugee crisis since World War II. Nearly 60 million people have been displaced worldwide. As people of faith, we are deeply challenged to respond. With me today is Cober Bauman, the Executive Director of the Mennonite Central Committee of Ontario, to talk about how his organization is making a difference. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, we are honored to be invited. Thanks for including us in your show.
Oh, well, you know, this crisis has captured all of our hearts. And, you know, when little 3-year-old Aylin washed up on the beach, it really changed things. Why was it that moment that people, because this has been going on for quite a while, right?
It has, and at Mennonite Central Committee, we'd been involved for the last 5 years since the civil war began in Syria, and even before that. But like many crises before, there's that critical moment, something happens, and now with social media and a picture that can go viral so quickly, that was very clearly a tipping point. And we're grateful that people have come alive to this, and there's a generous spirit across Canada, certainly across Ontario, that we're thrilled with, and we want to try and give people some really practical handles for how they can be a welcoming community.
That's beautiful. And, you know, this is one of the biggest relief things that you've taken on as MCC. What are you guys doing?
It is actually. We're now into our $31, $32 million range, which we've never spent anything close to like that in the past. MCC is almost 100 years old. So this is a humanitarian effort like nothing before.
Wow.
And we're doing that partly because, well, because we're a community of faith and we are called to make neighbors and be neighbors to people wherever they are. But partly this flood of people that we see on our TV screens so often that looks rather hopeless in many ways, we would say most of those people didn't want to leave. Most of those people want to go back to their own homes. But they can only do that if they feel a certain measure of safety. So humanitarian response, peace-building work in Syria and Lebanon is really about making it less likely that people will flee, more likely that peace will return, or at least an adequate level of security that people can take their families home instead of making that risky decision to get in a boat.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because, you know, you think about humanitarian aid and you certainly are providing that, but peace building is one of those things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think about. It's one of the things I love about the MCC, that you're always taking a unique approach. What does that involve, peacemaking?
Religious tolerance, working with leaders, working with kids in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, so that the other is seen differently. There are, believe it or not, really practical ways that children and leaders can be helped to see differently, to look at the other in a way that doesn't likely result in violence down the road. Is it peace building that's going to end the current conflict in Syria in the next few weeks? Probably not, but it's very long-term, long horizon kind of work that makes these kinds of conflicts, violent conflicts, less likely in the future.
Now, of course, this crisis is being fueled by different parts of Africa, Eritrea, of course, Syria and Iraq, but you're mainly working in the Middle East, is that correct?
We are, although we're active in Sudan, the next largest group of refugees. And we want to be really clear with you and your viewers to say that, you know, Syrians are not more important refugees, or they're not necessarily even at greater risk than the people dealing with the civil conflict in Sudan. We're responding in a bigger way, in part because community groups and churches are coming to us and saying, this now has captured our imagination, and we want to respond. But we're always asking. In fact, we said to a family the other day, a church whose family they thought that they were going to sponsor was coming from Syria, and we said, well, actually that family's not available. Would you take a family from Sudan? And they immediately said yes. And I think that's the kind of spirit that we hope kind of permeates this.
Yeah, and we need that. As you said before the program here, you told me that, you know, with the focus on Syria, you're concerned that people from Sudan may end up being shortlisted and delayed even further getting here, and they need it just as much as Syria, and we have to consider that as well.
That's an important point, and we don't want to lose sight of that, while at the same time, you know, grasping or welcoming the very spirit of generosity that we're seeing, especially in the faith community.
And refugee sponsorship is the third thing you're doing. Tell me about that.
We always say that, well, in fact, one of my colleagues in Beirut would say, refugee sponsorship is the most important second best thing you can ever do. Because the first best, of course, is to help people stay in their region. But refugee sponsorship is not new. It started with the federal government making these sponsorship agreements with groups like Mennonite Central Committee back in the late 70s, right after the Vietnam War. So there was a flood. About 70,000 people came into Canada then. And we think that the spirit of generosity that's there now is similar. Again, MCC has the agreements. Groups can contact us and we'll help walk them through the undertaking to sponsor, the settlement plan, help them figure out how to raise funds. Maybe they can find another neighborhood church down the street who's also wanting to partner with them. And then we're not going to leave you alone during that first year that you have responsibility. You will be able to call us up and we can help troubleshoot things and give you some tips as to what it's going to be like to actually have to walk with a family for that year.
And I know, a lot of people's hearts were broken and they really want to reach out. There's a little bit of concern I find among people though, that what if the family that I'm sponsoring is a terrorist? They hear about ISIS. What if some ISIS sympathizers come into Canada and do terrorism here and I'm their sponsor? Is that a concern?
Well, when I read the Old Testament and the New Testament, I keep hearing the call to welcome the stranger. And I generally don't see anything there about, an exception clause. But I also say to people, we're not naive enough to think this is absolutely risk-free. Of course, we know that someone could come with some less than golden intentions. But there is a really important screening process, a very thorough and rigorous screening process that the UN and the Canadian government will do. And we also believe that we're communities of love and that is actually going to be a real response to perhaps some small groups of people who bring ill intentions. And I think we need to have some faith and some strong courage as we go forward with that and believe that there will be changes happen also with us. We who sponsor will be transformed by this experience too. That's very much been part of this 35-year history of refugee sponsorship.
And on this program all the time we have stories of people whose hearts are changed by Christians who love outrageously like God loves us. I think of one of the verses, of course there's verses in the New Testament as well, Leviticus 19:34. It says, "The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt," speaking to Israel. "I am the Lord your God." And it's like that challenge that we have to love everyone, even if, we're not sure how they feel back about us. And it's time for the church to step up. If someone is watching this and they want to sponsor a family or get involved, even whole municipalities are getting involved. Stratford Festival here in Ontario, which is well known for their theatrical productions, is dedicating an entire show to help fund families. How do people go about starting this journey or learning about it?
Well, call us at MCC or go on our website, mcccanada.ca/refugees. And we have people that know how to do this and we'll take some of the mystery out of it for you. We'll, as I said earlier, help walk you through the application process, and then we'll be there with you as well when your family arrives to help you figure out how to meet them at the airport and find an apartment and get mom and dad signed up for ESL classes. It's neither rocket science nor is it easy. It's a commitment for a year, and we want people to know that and go into it with their eyes wide open. But it is an opportunity to be God's love to a stranger in a really practical and remarkable way. So we highly recommend it and are thrilled by how many, many groups have stepped up already.
Well, there's so much more we could talk about. We barely scratched the surface of where we could go with this, but thank you so much for what you're doing. You're a great example of God's love, and thank you for just facilitating people to do that as well.
Well, it wouldn't happen unless groups step up, because it's really there on the ground where people are finding the couch for the apartment and bringing people to their own church gatherings. That's where sponsorship happens. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in today. Well, we appreciate so much what MCC is doing. And if this has touched your heart, maybe you're looking for a challenge or a way that you can make a difference in the world. This might be something that you can do. I have a suspicion it doesn't only impact the families that come here, but it might change your life as well.